Good morning, everybody. Welcome to week 2. So last week we were looking at the perspectives of psychology, and then we also looked at research and methods. And so I hope that this is starting to get a little bit interesting. This week we are actually going to dive into one of the perspectives. If you remember, we did the hand, right? Psychodynamic, looking behind you. At your past, at the conflicts of your past. Your pointer finger was, how do you process things? How do you think about things? That would be cognitive perspective. I won't ask you to point your middle finger at me. Why? Well, because remember, you learned that was naughty, right? And so learned is behavioral. Our ring finger is humanistic, and then today what we're going to look at is the little pinky finger of biological. And the reason, remember, it's our pinky is because we still know so little, but we're learning more all the time. Okay, so you ready to get started with biological? I am too. Let's get started. So we're going to get started today with really the building blocks of your brain and of your biological system, and that is the neuron. So we're going to take a look at neurons, nerves, and the nervous system. Our learning objectives for today, hopefully by the end of this lecture, you will have an understanding of the central nervous system. I promise you, you'll also have this really annoying song going through your head that we're going to play. And then you will also be able to demonstrate the knowledge of a neuron. There's some extra credit after this that if you want to do, it will demonstrate your knowledge of the neuron. And so we'll talk more about that in your next part of this module, okay? So let's get started. The neuron is the basic cell that makes up the nervous system and that receives and sends messages within that system. Basically, it is what facilitates communication within your nervous system. The neuron in your brain connects with parts of your body outside your brain. It receives sensory input from maybe your hands or your feet and sends what we call motor neurons or motor output to your feet and so on. But your neurons actually do a tremendous amount of communicating among each other. In fact, most of the neurons in your brain are called interneurons. Neurons serve only to connect to other nearby neurons rather than reach farther into your body. So let's look at how it works. So the first part of the neuron is what we call the dendrites. The dendrites are a branch-like structure of the neuron that receives messages from other cells, and basically it's the receiver of all messages, okay? So I want you to think about for just a minute, if you're into sports, maybe football or baseball, in football, the dendrites would be a receiver. It'd be catching the ball. In baseball or softball, it's like they have little mitts on, and they are grabbing information all the time. The next part is the soma. The soma is the cell of the body that the neuron is responsible for maintaining the life of the cell. This is the part that contains the nucleus, okay? So if you see in our little picture here, right here's the nucleus, and this is the soma. Remember, this is the dendrite, so information gets caught by the dendrite, it goes into the soma, and then it moves on through the axon. The axon is a tube-like structure that carries the neural messages to other cells. I want you to picture for me just a minute, or for just a moment, I want you to picture with me a slide at a park, okay? We've all probably been to the city parks at one time or another, and I don't know about you, but my favorite slide is the one that kind of twists, and it usually has some enclosed part to it, and that's kind of reminds me of the axon. The axon is this enclosed tube-like structure that the information is going to pass through. Now, here's the tricky part. How do we make that go faster? Well, on our slide, what we're going to do is we're going to put, this sounds so gross, but we're going to put like lard inside of it, okay? We're going to grease that thing up. What's that going to do? Man, it's going to keep kids just flying down that slide. Well, believe it or not, your body or your neurons also have a fatty substance called myelin. And that myelin, it coats the axons of the neurons, and it insulates, it protects, and of course, it speeds up the neural impulses. By the way, bundles of myelin-coated axons travel together in cables, and these cables are called nerves. Just another FYI, there are actually a lot of diseases out there that are caused when that myelin sheath ends up breaking down. Diseases such as MS or Parkinson's all have this as one of the causes of those diseases. Okay, so we've gone from the dendrite to the soma, down the axon, and now it's going to just be dispersed down the axon terminals, okay? And that's what these tube-like structures are. They are the branches at the end of the terminal. And at the end of these, we have what's called terminal buttons. So we also call them synaptic knobs. I'll accept either one. And then inside these, there are what's called synaptic vesicles, which are little blisters or fluid-filled sacs. And these sacs basically contain the information that's going to be released and thrown out to the next neuron being caught by its dendrite. Now, the chemical that is being released from those vesicles into the next dendrite, those are neurotransmitters. And so those neurotransmitters have all the information that your body needs for thinking and acting. Now, we have different kinds of neurons, okay? So we're going to start out with the sensory neurons. They're what carry information from the sensory receptors to the central nervous system, and I've abbreviated central nervous system as CNS, okay? So whenever you see that, just know that stands for central nervous system. So the sensory neurons carry the information from sensory receptors. So what are sensory receptors? Well, they could be anything from, you touch the stove. It's hot. That sensory receptor, as soon as you touch the hot stove, it sent sensory neurons up to your brain, communicating to your brain, you just touched something hot. Now, what does it do with that? Well, there's an interneuron that connects between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. And the interneuron says, hey, motor neuron, you might want to pay attention. And the motor neuron says, remove your hand. Oh, ouch, it's hot. So those are the three different kinds that we have. The sensory neuron, the motor neurons, and the interneurons. So again, sensory is carrying incoming information from the sensory receptors. Motor neurons carry outgoing information from the central nervous system to your muscles and your glands. And the interneurons, well, they're what connect the two other kinds of neurons. One thing that we do have that is just amazing in our brain is neuroplasticity. So first of all, what happens if the spinal cord is damaged? Well, there becomes a block in the communication system. We have to have our spinal cord has to be intact in order for this to work seamlessly. But neuroplasticity is something that actually takes place within the brain, not the spinal cord. Its ability within the brain to constantly change both the structure and the function of many cells in response to experience or trauma. What does this really mean? Well, number one, it takes place, or it's better if it takes place when you're very, very young. The younger you are, the more neuroplasticity you have. I think that's though true for your whole body. Think about babies. Babies can literally put their foot in your mouth. As adults, much harder of a task. We might do that metaphorically, but physically it's really hard because we're not as flexible, right? Well, our brain is still developing when we're so small, and so the earlier, of course, we don't want brain damage to happen to anybody, but if the younger the child is, the odds are their brain has more neuroplasticity to it. We're going to watch a quick video about a little girl who she had a disease called Rasmussen syndrome. And this disease caused basically part of her brain to short circuit. And so they had to remove half of her brain. The part that you'll just want to note, they don't remove the lower part on that side because that is what controls heartbeat and breathing. But the rest of that side does. Now, something you might not be aware of, or you might be aware of. Did you know the right side of your brain controls the left side of your body, and the left side of your brain controls the right side of your body? Well, so if she has her right side of her brain removed, what happens to the left side of her body? It becomes paralyzed. And so she has to work with physical therapists to retrain her brain to take over for that missing side. And believe it or not, because she's so young, it's possible. So watch with me now.
On today's health, a daring choice to save a young girl with a debilitating brain disorder. NBC's chief medical editor, Dr. Nancy Snyderman, is here with her amazing story. Nancy, good morning.
Good morning, and it is an amazing story because little Cameron Mott was born a healthy, happy baby, but at the age of 3, things changed, and very quickly, putting her life on the line. The only hope, an extraordinary procedure for an extraordinary little girl, removing half of her brain.
The Mott family started their days like most other families. However, within an hour of awakening, their days were abruptly turned upside down. At the age of 3, their daughter Cameron started to have seizures, up to 10 a day.
Within 20 minutes or so, she would have her first seizure, and then they would just continue throughout the day. It was not any quality of life for her.
After almost 3 years of seizures, multiple medications, and no answers, Cameron's cognitive intelligence was declining, and she was barely talking.
She wore a helmet all the time because her seizures were just so aggressive and violent, and she would just get hurt so often.
Cameron was finally diagnosed with a rare condition called Rasmussen syndrome, an autoimmune disease that causes destruction of one side of the brain. Hope came at Johns Hopkins University Medical Center, where neurologists concluded that Cameron was a candidate for a daring and complicated surgery, a hemispherectomy, or removal of up to one half of the brain.
We like to do children because of their ability or their plasticity. That's their ability of the other side of the brain that we haven't removed to take over and control the function of the diseased half that we're removing.
After a long but successful surgery, Cameron was left with only the right half of her brain and awakened completely paralyzed on the left side of her body. The real challenge was just beginning.
After surgery, she needs immediate therapy. And the more therapy she gets, the faster that she's going to recover that side that's become paralyzed.
With intense therapy, the remaining side of the brain was able to relearn and compensate for the hemisphere that was removed. Cameron exceeded expectations and walked out of the rehabilitation center 4 weeks later.
Cameron's actually doing very well. She's able to walk and run around the office and certainly around the playground.
Muddy over there.
And most importantly, she's able to do well in school.
And she hasn't had a seizure in 2 years.
We were just asking for some sort of normality. We didn't know we were going to get the full deal. And we truly, I tell Cameron's story as a miracle. I truly do believe that miracles happen, and my daughter Cameron is a walking example of that.
Walking, yes, but she dreams of dancing.
I want to be a ballerina because they twirl and dance.
And Dr. Nancy is joining us we have Cameron this morning, along with her parents, Shelley and Casey, as well as her little sister, Carolyn. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
So first of you, I wanted to ask you, Cameron, is how do you feel? How? And when you watch that, do you have any memory of it?
No.
No, you don't remember any of it?
No.
No?
Not at all.
And how are you doing today?
Good.
Yeah? Are you doing well in school? Do you enjoy it?
I enjoy it.
So how did you decide that this was the right choice? I mean, and now obviously you feel that it was?
It was absolutely the right choice. And really for us, when we knew what she had and we knew that this was our only option to help her, the risk was something that we were willing to deal with because her quality of life was so poor.
A very heart-wrending decision for you.
It was.
For any parent.
Very scary because you just can't imagine what your child will be like after such a dramatic brain surgery. It just doesn't seem like they could be the same child, really.
Is she the same child, Casey?
Oh, yeah, she's always been a real bubbly little girl ever since she was born. Blonde, curly hair as a baby, and we more or less lost our daughter and got her back with surgery. So.
Nancy, what do we know what causes this Rasmussen syndrome?
It's an electrical storm that just sends the wrong kind of electricity. And if you think very, very simply that the right side of your brain controls the left side of your body, it was the right side of her brain that was having all these misfirings, and that's what was causing her seizures. If you look at this model, Anne, except for the lower parts of the brain that control breathing, it really means taking out one half of the brain. So if you take out the right brain, you know that patient is going to wake up paralyzed, and that's exactly what happened to Cameron. But because the pediatric brain is so elastic, the left side of her brain took over for the right side, and look at her now. It's extraordinary.
How long did that take, that relearning period, Shelley?
It was pretty intense. When we got home, it was 10 hours a week of very intense therapy. She started right back to school and has just come a very long way. Therapy has really just tapered off recently.
Cameron, you want to be a ballerina?
Yes, I want to be a ballerina.
Oh, we will just celebrate that day when you're a ballerina. So keep twirling, darling. Okay? Deal? Give it to me. Awesome. All right, Cameron and Shelley and Casey and also Caroline and Nancy Snyderman, thank you so much for bringing us this story.
So I have to tell you, I find that video completely fascinating because honestly, the fact that our brain is so powerful and it's just so interesting and unique, but it is also, it works to help you function in everyday life, of course. If it doesn't work correctly, then what happens? Well, you can't function correctly. Something I want to bring up that we don't really test about in here, but neural pathways. Neural pathways, I want you to think about, I want you to imagine with me, okay, for just a minute, a beautiful meadow. If you've ever been to Yosemite, there's that beautiful meadow that's between basically the rocks on the side, the mountains. But in that meadow, there's a path, okay? How did that pathway come to be? Honestly, it came to be because people trampled over it, or maybe animals walked it again and again and again. And the more times we walked a path, well, the more defined that pathway becomes. Well, your brain works the same way. You develop neural pathways through habit. 1 + 1 equals, you should have said 2. 1 + 1 equals 2. Did you know when you were 2 years old, you didn't really understand that concept, right? And you started learning your ABCs how? Well, you started singing a song most likely when you were about 3 or 4, maybe 5. And the more you sang it, the more that neural pathway became entrenched in your brain. Now, it wasn't until you were in kindergarten or first grade that you realized what those letters really represented or what those numbers represented. But the more you do things, the easier it becomes. If you have your driver's license and you are driving, tell me this. I mean, I know you can't, but tell me or think about, do you think about every action you do? At the beginning you did. When you were first learning how to drive, oh, okay, I'm going to press the gas. Okay, press the brake. Okay, turn on my turn indicator. You thought about everything very purposefully. But as you did it more, it became easier. It became more habitual. Believe it or not, those neural pathways became more and more developed, and they become more developed. There are neural pathways you don't even think about. Think about this. If you have shoes on and socks, what did you do first? Did you put on sock, shoe? Or did you do sock, shoe? And which foot did you begin with? Because I promise you, that is a habit that you've developed over time. How do you eat your food? You have your plate in front of you. What do you do with it? Do you stick your fork into everything? Do you eat the thing in front of you and turn your plate? Do you eat what's one thing and then the next? You probably do the same thing for each meal, as long as you know you're sitting in front of a plate, because that's most of us are eating on the run, it seems like sometimes. But those are neural pathways. Can you change neural pathways? You can. So let's talk about that. Let's go back to the meadow. Okay, so we have our pathway in the meadow, but we decide we want to take a different path. But there is no path that exists. Well, we can make our own path, but it has to be very purposeful and effortful. We have to conscientiously do something different. Let's say we have a child who is a thumb sucker, and we are trying to keep them from sucking their thumb. It is very purposeful and effortful because basically that's become a habit, right? They have to learn not to put their hands up to their mouth. Or when they do it, they take it away. And so that is a neural pathway. We're going to go on and talk about nerves. I mentioned this earlier in another slide when we were talking about, I think, axons. But basically, nerves consist of neural cables containing many axons. They are part of what we call the peripheral nervous system, and they connect muscles, glands, and sense organs to that central nervous system. Now, I love this graph because I think it really does show kind of how everything works. We start here with the broad idea of the nervous system. But the nervous system actually contains two different parts, the peripheral and the central. Now, the central basically is your brain and your spinal cord. It's very simple, even though it's complex in itself, but there's not a lot that goes under it. Your peripheral nervous system, however, gets a little bit more complicated. It's divided into autonomic and somatic. Autonomic, I want you to think about things that are on autopilot in your body. These are self-regulated actions of internal organs and glands, things that you don't have to think about, like your heart or breathing. Or, really, do you think about, hey, is my pancreas working right now? Or are my kidneys working? These are all autonomic because they just they're on autopilot all the time, okay? So autonomic, great way to remember autopilot. Somatic are voluntary muscles and movements of skeletal muscles, okay? So that you have an itch on your nose, you scratch it. That is your somatic nervous system. Under autonomic, though, we're going to continue on. The autopilot, Autopilot is, we have sympathetic and parasympathetic, okay? Sympathetic is when we are aroused, and parasympathetic is calming. Okay, so let's put that into real life example. You are driving in your car, and a car comes out of nowhere and pulls right in front of you. You slam on the brakes. Okay, let's take a quick scan of our body. What's going on? Well, our heart starts racing. We're breathing fast. We might even start perspiring because we got suddenly nervous. Our endorphins have been working all over the place. Guess what just kicked in? Your sympathetic nervous system. It aroused you. Now, do you stay that way? Once your heart gets going, does it continue to keep racing? Well, it shouldn't, because that's not healthy. It actually calms back down and you go back to normal after a few minutes. That is your parasympathetic nervous system working. So let's define these just a little bit more. Again, your central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. Your peripheral nervous system is the sensory and motor neurons that connect the central nervous system to the rest of the body. Okay? Your somatic and autonomic nervous systems. The somatic, remember this is under your peripheral. It's the division of the peripheral nervous system that controls the body's skeletal muscles, where the autonomic is the part of the peripheral nervous system that controls the glands and other muscles. So again, things are on autopilot. Underneath your autonomic nervous system, you have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Your sympathetic nervous system is the division of the autonomic nervous system that arouses the body, mobilizing its energy in stressful situations. Another way to think of this one is that fight or flight response. Remember, somebody jumps out and you are ready to either run away really fast or put up your dukes and fight them, okay? So then the parasympathetic nervous system is what calms your body down, bringing it back to that all-important word, homeostasis. If you use that word today, you will sound super smart. So use homeostasis in a sentence, bringing things back to normal, back to your normal. Okay, let's watch this last quick video. And again, I promised you'd be singing this song and it will just drive you nuts, but I hope you enjoy it. And look to the next slide for the Build a Neuron assignment. It is extra credit, but I hope that some of you participate. It is a fun project.
There's a telegram for you, ma'am, and the message is clear. It says there's something bugging you and buzzing in your ear. The results can be quite itchy, so what is your reply? Tell you're on the swat that fly. Hey, there's a telegraph line. You got yours and I got mine. It's called the nervous system, and everybody understands those telegram commands, and you know that everybody better listen. The central nervous system is the brain and the spine. The brain controls the system and the spine is the line. Telegrams come in to tell what's happening to you. Then telegrams go out to tell your body what to do. There's a telegram for you, sir. Better read it on the spot. It says your hand is near a stove that's very, very hot. The results can be quite painful, and there's no time to think. Quick, pull that hand away and get it to the sink. There's a telegraph line. You got yours and I got mine. It's called the nervous system, and everybody understands those telegram commands, and you know that everybody better listen. Your peripheral nerves, they go all out, delivering those messages your senses send out. From your hearing and touch to your sight and taste and smell, they let your brain react to all the messages they tell. There's a telegram for you, kid, and it's at an awkward time. It says you've got to go on stage and you forgot your lines. You're gonna be embarrassed cause this telegram's a rush. Your heart starts beating faster and you blush. Hey, there's a telegraph line. You got yours and I got mine. It's called the nervous system, and everybody understands those telegram commands, and you know that everybody better listen. The autonomic system has a hold of you, controlling automatically some things that you do. Your breathing and your heartbeat just go on naturally. And when you're scared, your nerves rev up the speed.